Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Recovery Talk in quite some time. I am officially starting season 2 of Recovery Talk. Not that I think anyone has really paid attention to seasons, but overall, I just felt that it was right to take a bit of a break because I had some things I needed to work on as well. I just completed my master thesis in extreme hunger, funnily enough. And I felt that it was time to, take a step back and then come back to the podcast with some new inspiration. And yeah, I'm so happy to be back. I am just so happy to finally be freed from the shackles of my master thesis, from the degree that I completely voluntarily signed up to do and even went in depth to do. Honestly, I really can't complain, but it has been a lot of work, but it's been very interesting and very rewarding work as well. I may discuss my thesis a bit more in a future episode. I have already discussed some of my findings in Substack. If you don't follow me on Substack already, it is letsrecover.substack.com. I do bonus podcast episode over at Substack for the paid subscribers, and then I do a lot of written contents, articles, etc., for people who are just free subscribers as well. So you can join me over there as well if you want some more recovery talk, whether it's bonus podcast episodes or recovery talk in, I guess you can say, written form. Because I do really love writing, and I have been doing some longer form writing articles over there. Okay, let's get started with today's episode. So today I want to talk about the fear of doing recovery wrong. This is something I see a lot in clients, and also see it a lot or hear it a lot from people who are listening to this podcast or following me through social media, just judging from some of the messages and questions that I get. So I wanted to talk about that phenomena a bit of fearing doing recovery wrong, and hopefully also offer some advice and support for the people who have a lot of fear of doing recovery wrong and find that this fear of doing recovery wrong is actually not really helping their recovery. That's the irony of it, right? So I have done quite a few episodes in the past where I talk about recovery perfectionism and perfectionism around food and eating in general. And what I often say there is that perfectionism in general is actually a form of procrastination. So it's procrastination done in the disguise of it being a desire to do well. But very often when you actually unpick the layers, you see that it's not really about just wanting to do recovery well. Instead, perfectionism can become this way to actually avoid action because you've set a bar for yourself so high and so unattainable that it's just not really possible to reach it. And then when you don't live up to your own extremely high standards, you're like, oh, great, I'm just the worst. I can't do this. Recovery is not working. And when working with people with eating disorders, what I often see is that the people who have the most steady and the most lasting and strong recoveries are the people who are able to implement some flexibility in their recoveries as well. And this does not mean, I'm going to just be flexible in recovery. Screw recovery perfectionism. So I'm just going to skip breakfast today, Of course, you need to be accountable and you need to actually do recovery. But instead, what I'm talking about here is flexibility in terms of figuring out what works for you and then leaving what doesn't. And not just endlessly overthinking, and instead focus on actions and trying things, seeing how it works for you, and then learning from it. And don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with wanting to do recovery right, wanting to do it well, wanting to build a strong, lasting recovery for yourself. Nothing wrong with that. It's one of the most important really investments you can make in your life, right? The problem is when that fear becomes so all-consuming that it just prevents any action, or when it's just really ruining your recovery rather than actually making it better. When you're just overthinking endlessly and you're just constantly planning and strategizing, but it doesn't really translate to action. That is when it is a problem. Because at the end of the day, recovery, it is a verb, right? It is something that you are doing, not something that you're thinking about doing. And speaking of which, I want to share a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, actually, that I think is very relevant to this. And it's called The Man in the Arena. And it goes the following. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong the man stumbled, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who do actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails whilst daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. End of quotes. So if you're familiar with Brené Brown, the title of her book, Daring Greatly, actually come from this quote. And I quite like this quote because it really emphasizes the importance of doing rather than just sitting there looking at the people who are doing and judging them on how they do it and what they could have done better. And I see this sometimes in recovery communities where someone who may not be in recovery themselves, they're kind of just sitting there judging other people. Like, are they really in recovery? Are they really doing it the best way? Like, are you really going for it? You know? And this is why it's just so important that you are focusing on yourself and staying in your own arena. And this goes far beyond recovery, you know, the importance of staying in your own arena and focusing on yourself, right? And to be honest, we all been guilty of judging one another for their performance, right? It's a very human thing. Like, imagine, for example, you're watching a football match and you sit there and you're watching some of the best players in the entire world doing things that most of us are completely unable to do. Yeah, we're going to be like, why did you miss that? Oh, come on, run faster, do this, do that. And that's just human, right? So I'm not saying that you're a bad person for having these tendencies. We all do it, right? I'm just saying it's something to be aware of in the context of recovery. And when it comes to recovery, the good thing about it is that the people who actually do go into the arena and they fight and they really push and they give it their all, right? They do tend to come out, maybe a bit bruised and battered at times, but they do tend to come out on the other side as winners. Because an eating disorder is something you can conquer. You can beat it. But I don't necessarily think you need to be 100% convinced that you're going to get out of it and be able to beat the eating disorder to actually start the fight. And I hear this a lot from people with eating disorders where they're like, you know what, I'm not feeling 100%, sure that I'll be able to do this, right? That I'll be able to do recovery, that I'll get out of this on the other side, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to give it my all. Because what is the alternative, right? Like, you kind of have to take that fight, right? And there's no other way around it than taking the fight. You can spend so much just mentally preparing for that fight, but honestly, you need to put yourself out there and really go in the arena. And if you fail while staring greatly, right? So I know this is a little bit of a side note, but I do think it fits in quite well because it really highlights the importance of action and of doing rather than just thinking about doing. Because as I said, perfectionism is procrastination. And I see so many people who have the best of intentions, but they're spending so long stuck in that metaphorical waiting room where they're just thinking, oh, I just need to learn a bit more. I need to listen to another podcast episode. I need to read another article. I need to wait until it is the perfect moment and time of my life, until I feel ready. The circumstances need to be like this, I need to wait until X, Y, Z. And you know what? It's never going to be the perfect circumstances. You're never going to feel completely ready. There's always going to be something, that is going to give your eating disorder a chance, or like an excuse to stay overdue. And you don't need to know everything about recovery to get started. You learn from doing, right? When I started my own recovery, I didn't know a fraction of all that I know now. It would be really weird if I did, right? I was just a teenager with an eating disorder. You couldn't expect me to have like a PhD level knowledge of all of the intrinsics about, hunger and biology and metabolism and psychology. No, That's not realistic, but I still managed to get out of it because I was focusing on that action. And don't get me wrong, learning about recovery is so important. It really did help me to actually gather some baseline knowledge about recovery and just knowing the basics, right? It did really help me, and especially helped soothe me when I was feeling very stressed in my recovery. But I think sometimes that excessively focusing on it without any action can be used as a way to kind of postpone recovery and as a way to avoid action. And it gives you that sensation of, oh, I am working on my recovery because I'm reading this book or I'm, doing X, Y, Z. But are you actually doing something practical that helps your recovery? Or are you just learning about recovery? Think about it like a surgeon can read as many autonomy books in the world as they want, but at one point, they're going to have to go and do a surgery, right? They're not really a good surgeon until they can do the surgery, right? In the same way, you can read 1,000 books about swimming and learning to swim and swimming strategies, but you need to eventually get your ass in the pool, right? And actually learn through doing. Don't use, learning about recovery as a substitute for action, right? Don't let that feeling of, like a little pat on the shoulder, I am doing something because I'm reading this book, right? You need to also focus on actions if you're going to get the results that you really want. So yeah, a gentle call out if this applies to any of my podcast listeners. It is so awesome that you're engaged in your recovery and you want to learn more. And I think it can be incredibly powerful with psychoeducation and knowing what is going on, right? I really understand this can be helpful, but it has to be combined with action, just like the surgeon surgeon needs to read an autonomy book, but also is eventually going to have to practice their skill. So, the fear of doing recovery wrong, what is really looming behind it? So very often I do think that there is a bit of that, it's kind of what I mentioned with recovery perfectionism, right? And the eating disorder perfectionism gets moved over to another area, and that becomes a way to procrastinate recovery because you're setting the bar so high for yourself. And then if you have one little slip or something that didn't go exactly to his plan, it's just like, well, I'm going to throw the whole recovery in the bin, right? And, recovery is going to have its ups and downs, right? That's just how it is. Doesn't mean that you should just throw the whole thing away and think that you are just don't deserve recovery or you just can't do it right, so might as well not do it, right? Recovery is messy. Recovery is non-linear. Recovery is going to surprise you at times, Recovery is not going to end up exactly like how you had predicted it to go in your head. And you know what? That is completely okay. And I see this a lot with clients where I'll have so many clients where I start working with them and they have this exact idea of how everything is going to go and how it's going to unfold and what is going to be the difficult parts of recovery and what is going to be the easy parts. And sometimes what we see is that the things that they had predicted to be super easy ends up being difficult. And then the things that they had predicted to be really difficult actually end up being a lot easier. And it could be things that they hadn't even thought about that end up being quite big challenges. So overall, you cannot 100% predict how recovery is going to unfold until you're actually doing it. So often people will endlessly intellectualize and then they actually start acting and then they realize, things are going different. And that's okay. And also something going different doesn't automatically mean it's going to be more difficult or harder in any way, right? And there will sometimes be people who will say that recovery ended up not being as bad as they thought, not as hard as they thought. And some would even feel guilty for this. Some people would be like, oh my God, am I not supposed to struggle more with this? And this especially goes with certain parts of recovery. Like I remember when before I started my own recovery, I thought in my head that eating the food was going to be the most difficult part. But do you know what? That was the best part. I was having a great time. I'm not saying it was always great, not saying the eating disorder never crept in, but being able to just really enjoy foods and enjoy the nice foods that I banned myself from, like even though my eating disorder was screaming at me at times, that was enjoyable. That was nice. Reaching my calorie goal, my 3,000 minimum goal, that was not actually the hardest part for me in recovery. Then there were other things that I had not even thought about that ended up being more difficult. And of course, there are people who maybe they start recovery and they don't expect it to be as difficult as it turns out to be, right? You cannot exactly predict it. And that is okay because you don't have to predict it. Nobody can predict it. And very often when I work with clients, they will almost want me to give them an exact timeline of when this is going to happen, when that's going to happen, how it's going to unfold, how just almost like wanting me to look in the future. But that's not really possible. Nor do I think it is particularly necessarily like a good thing. I think like learning to sit with uncertainty is a very useful skill in recovery and also in life in general. So when it comes to the fear of doing recovery wrong, I was kind of mentioning a bit like the underlying fears, what's actually going on. And I mentioned recovery perfectionism. But there is another thing that I want to also discuss a bit about what I often sometimes see could be underlying the fear of doing recovery wrong. And that is the fear of not really healing your metabolism and therefore ending up, quote unquote, gaining more weight than needed because you're metabolically suppressed. Where the fear is like, oh my God, I'm scared of not doing recovery right so that I don't fix my metabolism, whilst also being simultaneously terrified of doing anything that would actually help your metabolism, such as, eating more, resting more, etc., etc. That's the paradox of eating disorder recovery, right? And it's interesting because of all my podcast episodes, the most popular one is the one I did on metabolism. And at first I was thinking, wow, this is awesome. I love that people are so interested in, their metabolic health and learning more about this, working on restoring metabolism, because that is an important part of recovery. But then I started kind of thinking a bit more about it and observing a bit more what people were actually asking me. And then I started realizing, oh God, I think a lot of people are actually really interested in this because they are so scared of, quote unquote, gaining too much weight or gaining unnecessarily. And that is the eating disorder speaking. It is the eating disorder camouflaging itself as recovery, sneaking in and being concerned about weight gain. Like that is somehow the worst thing that can happen. It is not. Be mindful of your eating disorder sneaking in and taking control of your recovery this way by still actually fueling eating disorder thoughts and conspiracies and using this as a way to create recovery perfectionism. And it's so interesting because I get so many messages of people contacting me that they're like, oh my God, I'm so scared. I ruined my metabolism. I keep gaining and gaining, overanalyzing their hunger and their intake. But the interesting plot twist is that despite doing that, the same people tend to often have those restrictive elements. So this creates this paradox of you are so scared of not healing your metabolism, but at the same time you are also restricting, which in itself prevents the metabolism from going up, right? You can't heal your metabolism when you're eating 1,200 calories and going to the gym every day. That is just not going to happen. There's the paradox of, if you're so scared of that, why do you still have those restrictive elements, right? And it shows the illogical aspects of an eating disorder. And this also shows that the fear of doing recovery wrong doesn't necessarily always translate to recovery-oriented actions, because if it did, people with this fear would have just been like, oh, then I'm just going to eat more and rest and take it easy. Of course, in some cases, it can translate to action, right? Some people may be like, yeah, you know what? I actually do need to eat more. I do need to rest. I do need to work on these things, right? And, nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying is it could be worth unpacking if there is an underlying fear of weight gain and if you are reinforcing this fear through endless analysis and overthinking. So some of you may be familiar with my 4 R's framework. And if you're not familiar with the 4 R's, I would strongly recommend you check out the episode that I did on that. The episode is called The 4 R's of Recovery. And this is essentially my key framework for recovery. It's a very non-controversial approach that pretty much is kind of what most actual serious eating disorder treatment providers are working with. And essentially what I'm arguing is that for recovery to occur, you have to cover 4 essential R's with a 5th potential bonus R. And that if you get these 4 R's completely covered, you don't have to stress and analyze so much. And these R's are rest, refeeding, reprogramming, some people will call it rewiring, and restoration. And the 5th bonus R is rediscovery. But that rediscovery part tends to happen once the other 4 R's are fulfilled. It's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to actually fulfill the 4 baseline, 4 core aspects before you can reach that self-actualization part of things. And rediscovery is essentially about self-actualization, like realizing who you are outside of the eating disorder, your purpose, etc., etc. And don't get me wrong, of course you can work on, self-discovery aspects whilst you are working on other things in recovery. But it might be a bit more challenging because you're going to be very focused on your recovery, and your brain is just going to be so wired to focus just on food that, starting to figure out what is my purpose in life is going to be a bit overwhelming, right? Because all you're going to be able to think about is cheesecake. Like, you're going to think your purpose in life is cheesecake. It's not. I mean, probably not. But, So essentially 4 core parts of recovery, and with a potential 5th bonus one. And you don't have to stress too much outside of that, right? Make sure you got those covered, but you don't need to endlessly analyze outside of that, right? And any serious eating disorder treatment provider is gonna, they may not use the 4 R's framework, because I literally made that up, but they're gonna talk about the importance of these 4 R's, so importance of restoration of weight to your set point range, the importance of actually eating enough, the importance of rest, etc., etc. And of course, reprogramming, doing the opposite actions, challenging, rewiring, absolutely essential. And if you do that, if you do all of these things, you're probably going to be good, right? Yes, your eating disorder is super sneaky and will often tend to just kind of sneak in these 4 hours or 5 hours and tell you, oh, you don't really need to do that. You don't really need to challenge that. Or you don't really need to rest now, right? This is also why you should work with someone who can help you target this. You cannot just sit there and think and not do. So of course, work with someone, make sure that you are targeting things and make sure that you are doing practical work. But beyond that, recovery is supposed to have some flexibility to it, right? One thing may work for some people and not for others, and that's okay. You're kind of creating it or making it up as you're getting along, right? As you're walking. Again, you can't be expected to know exactly how it's going to be. You're walking a road that you haven't necessarily walked before, or maybe you have walked this road before, but you used to always take a different route to where you want to be, right? Maybe you always took left when you know that you should actually gone to the right. Maybe you always took the quasi-recovery route, right? Or from one obsession to another. Oh, I'm gonna recover through clean eating and body fitness, right? And if you just keep taking that route, it's not gonna take you to the destination that you want to get at, right? You need to walk the walk. Or maybe you have taken the road before, but you just walk to one point and then you stop or you turn halfway. You don't need to see the full road to keep walking. And if you have some stumbles, if you fall, you get back up. If you have a slip up, you can learn from it. As long as the slip up doesn't mean that you just spiral and you continue engaging non-stop in eating disorder behavior. Or as long as you don't use this logic as a thing of like, oh, recovery is not supposed to be perfect, therefore I can just engage in a bunch of disordered behaviors and expect recovery, right? You have to get in the arena, as I said. If you fall down, get back up and learn from it. Maybe you realize, oh, I'm falling because I keep doing this weird thing when I'm walking. Maybe I should not do that. And find someone who can support you so that if you do fall, someone can help put you back up again and help you learn from those mistakes. And this is so important. It's not just about recovery, right? This is in so many other areas of life. So think about dating, for example. So now I'm in a very healthy, committed, grown-up relationship, like literally the most peaceful thing ever. Whenever I see a lot of like online hot takes about relationships and dating, I'm just like, what are these people on about? Like, why are you not with someone who like you? Like, what is going on? It seems like psychological torture, some of the things I see people talking about. I don't have everything sorted in life, but my relationship is, zero source of stress in my life. And I'm not saying that this is how every relationship is going to be. Some people are a bit more, temperamental or chaotic. Different relationships have different dynamics. But overall, have a good relationship was what I was trying to say. Point is, before I reached this point of having a nice, healthy adult relationship, I had to go through a lot of chaos. I had to learn the hard way. I had to put myself out there in the dating world and have experiences and learn the hard way, right? And I remember being so scared to start dating people because I had very little experience because of my eating disorder kind of just wreaked havoc on my teens, where a lot of people start, doing these kind of things. And I was so scared, and it was so tempting to just ignore that whole part of my life, right? And I could have done that, but that wouldn't have given me happiness, because I did know deep inside I'm someone who wants companionship in a way of a relationship, right? And yeah, I read some articles and books, and nothing wrong with that, right? But at the end of the day, nothing could replace me actually going out there, going on dates, learning that way, including, unfortunately, sometimes learning the hard way and getting hurt. It sucked in the moment, but I learned from it. And I could turn it around and actually move forward and be like, okay, well, I didn't maybe figure out what I wanted, but I figured out what I don't want. And that is helpful as well. Instead of, spending like 5 years in a toxic relationship, because character development, right? That's not what I'm saying. You should learn from your mistakes, not marry them, okay? And I think recovery is a bit similar. And the good thing about recovery is that recovery is a bit more straightforward, right? Compared to something like dating. Recovery is kind of like, you do probably have some sort of awareness of what needs to be done. People can be confusing. Recovery, yeah, it can be confusing, but at the end of the day, you do know that you need to focus on these 4 hours. You need to focus on making sure you're getting enough food, getting enough rest, that your body finds its natural set point, and that you're doing the opposite actions, repeat. So with recovery, there are some clear instructions. With recovery, you can work with someone to hold your hand when you are going through those important steps. Like, that's not really the case with dating. Like, yeah, you can hire a dating coach, I guess, but it's not really that as common. And, with both of them, it's going to be scary. You're still going to have to do it for the version of your future self that you want to move towards. And yes, it's going to be different for everyone. Some people have it harder than others. This goes with dating and also eating disorder. Some people get out there and they have an awful dating experience that really traumatized them. Other people go out there and then they meet their partner for life after the first date they ever go to, right? Some people have it easier than others. Some people have it messier than others. People have different challenges, whether it's recovery or dating. But you have to get out there, right? That is the commonality here. And listen to the people who have gone that route. Their route may not be the exactly same as yours, but it's better to listen to them rather than the people who just never taken that route at all. Or the people who took the route and then just walked back home and they never finished the route, right? And then they were like, oh, recovery doesn't work. And it's like, yeah, but you went back when you were halfway there. How can you judge a destination you haven't been to? And sometimes people confuse the journey with the destination. They're not the same. Being in recovery is very different than being recovered. And so many times people will do the destination and be in the destination of recovery. They walk and then they're like, this is miserable. And then they think that means that the destination will be miserable. But they're two different things. It's like me being on a flight to a tropical island and then midway through the flight, I'm just like, I don't like this tropical island. It's like, you're on a plane. You're not on the tropical island just yet, right? And also, I may have said this before, but if an eating disorder, if it was like a destination on TripAdvisor, it would have the worst reviews ever. Would you ever recommend your eating disorder to someone else? I don't think I've ever heard anyone say yes to that. Even people who are really, really sick and in the really acute stages of an eating disorder, they don't tend to tell you that, yeah, best thing ever, 10 out of 10, would recommend to other people. Honestly, TripAdvisor reviews would be like 0 stars, shitty facilities, bad vibes, crap food. Do not go there, steer away. So why would you keep staying at a destination that you know is shit, to say it straightforward? And destination recovery, on the other hand, it's not perfect. I'm not going to make it seem like destination recovery is this, beautiful tropical islands where all your worries melt away. Life is not supposed to be perfect. Being recovered is not supposed to be perfect. Life is supposed to actually include some healthy struggle, but at least you have that purpose in life and you are equipped to deal with healthy struggle, because you don't have that eating disorder constantly weighing you down. And at least you have normal pancakes, for God's sake, normal pancakes instead of egg white things. Honestly, that in and of itself should be enough reason to steer away from destination eating disorder, because gross. I think an eating disorder wreaks havoc on the taste buds. There's no way people are unironically enjoying that. So, speaking of that destination recovery, it's just very important that you're mindful of when you're walking that walk, when your eating disorder is trying to join you on your path and try to tell you, oh, no, I'm on your team. Eating disorder loves to camouflage itself as recovery. And I think overall, recovery perfectionism and the fear of doing recovery wrong is a very good example of this. Because I hear so often people being so scared of not eating in a perfect way because they're scared it won't fix their metabolism. And they're scared of not fixing their metabolism, not because metabolism is actually important and good, and it's great to have a normal functioning body, but they're doing it because they're scared of weight gain. And I get it, and I don't want to shame people for having this fear. We know that this is a very real and common fear for people with eating disorders, and we do know that we live in a society that kind of echo a lot of these things as well. But again, this is not why metabolic healing is so important. It's not like, oh yeah, heal your metabolism, stay skinny forever, life hack. That is not how it is. First of all, you can be metabolically healthy at different sizes. Not everyone who's in a bigger body is there because their metabolism is broken through yo-yo dieting. Like, yeah, we do know that yo-yo dieting is an important predictor for future weight gain. And we do know that people who are constantly in that cycle of dieting, they do tend to end up at a higher weight because they're constantly jumping between restriction and then reactive hunger, right? There's just no break from it. Of course, it would make sense that they will hold on to more weight. That's what study says, not something controversial there. But I think that because society can have these fatphobic tendencies, it can translate to this meaning that this is why an eating disorder or yo-yo dieting is bad. It's bad because it can make you shoot and end up at a higher weight. Weight gain is not why dieting is bad. Dieting is bad because it's miserable and mentally and physically exhausting. And this narrative that being in a bigger body is inherently a result of like a broken metabolism or something gone wrong is a way to pathologize people in bigger bodies. So yes, there are people who are in bigger bodies because maybe they've been yo-yo dieting their whole life or they have a certain metabolic condition. But there are other people who are in bigger bodies because that's just their body, right? Body diversity exists. You can be metabolically healthy at different sizes, and that's okay. And recovery is about reaching your body's natural set point weight range, and you do that by giving your body what it needs to function properly. And if you instead see recovery and so-called fixing your metabolism as this like life hack towards infinite skinniness, that is probably your eating disorder interfering with your recovery. And then you have to ask yourself, is that really a recovery, or is it just living with an eating disorder with certain adjustments? And I see some of these tendencies or like patterns, for example, in people with reactive hunger, where let's say someone is really obsessed with chocolate and they're thinking, yeah, I need to get through this period of eating chocolate so that I can come out the other side without chocolate obsession, right? And yeah, that is very, very fair. Have a food that you feel like you quote unquote can't control yourself around. Giving yourself unlimited access to that is, of course, the best way for that food to become just a food. So that is fair. But what I sometimes hear underlying here is people saying more something along the lines of, I need to get this chocolate obsession thing out of my system so I can go back to a quote unquote healthy, clean eating diet afterwards, right? And essentially what you're saying there is you want to go through recovery so that you can do all of the things your eating disorder is telling you to do, just in a recovery way, right? Can you see how this is not recovery, but rather just the eating disorder with adjustments? Or it is recovery, but with the eating disorder pulling the strings still, right? And again, don't shame yourself or think that you're the bad person or you're doing something wrong if you have some of these thoughts and urges, right? It's just about being aware of them and kind of critically evaluating the motivations. Instead, what could be a goal in the chocolate example could be, yeah, of course, you want to have a more chill relationship with chocolate, but not so that you can go back to an orthorexic diet in an easier way because you're not bothered by constant chocolate cravings. But instead, you come to a point where chocolate is just chocolate. It's just any other food. You have it sometimes, it doesn't control your life. You're not feeling that ravenous around it, right? That is instead a healthier goal. It's not like, oh, now I should never have chocolate again, right? So when talking about the fear of doing recovery wrong, I also think for some people, we put so much work and effort into the recovery that it becomes something that's very important to them. And sometimes that can feel very, very fragile. And they're so scared of accidentally ruining it, right? You end up in this safe recovery bubble. And you're so scared of the real world and that big, dangerous, looming diet culture out there that is going to burst your bubble. But again, here's the thing. If you put a lot of work in your recovery, you've been focusing on the 4 hours, your recovery is probably a lot stronger than you think it is. So, for example, imagine you've done a lot of work in your recovery and then your friend is asking you, hey, do you want to go grab lunch? And you're like, no, because what if someone at the lunch table orders a salad and talks about their diet, right? And it's like, yeah, that's technically possible, but you can't isolate yourself for the rest of your life and avoid doing anything that can make you happy because of this what if, right? So instead, you go to that lunch, right? Could be that someone said something triggering, could also be that no one said anything triggering, right? But again, if you have built a strong recovery, you probably will be able to handle that a lot better than you think. And our brains as human beings, we have a tendency to just endlessly replay worst case scenarios over and over. Like, what if someone at that lunch table says something super triggering? What if I don't handle it? What if it go wrong? What if it go wrong, right? But then reframe it. What if it goes right? What if you actually end up having a great time? What if nobody said anything triggering? Or if they did, you were able to brush it off and proceed, right? If you're putting work into your recovery, you're probably going to be strong enough to handle situations, even if they are a bit triggering. You're going to be like, yeah, that was triggering, that was uncomfortable, but I can focus on not letting it control my actions. Can't necessarily make it not be triggering, but you can, control your actions, and that's where the focus is better to be. And I see this a lot where people are in this safe, comfortable bubble and they're so scared of doing anything in fear that it may harm their recovery because they're scared that they won't handle the trigger. But, that's, first of all, is no way to live, right? And I also think you probably aren't giving yourself enough credit. You probably will be able to handle certain triggers more than you think you are. And a lot of times what's actually happening in this situation is that more suffering comes from the pattern of endlessly avoiding potential discomforts than the discomfort itself. So let me repeat that. More suffering comes from you avoiding discomfort than what the discomfort in itself would have caused you. So the pain of that endless isolation and just never seeing your friend again because what if one of them says something triggering is probably going to collectively create more suffering and pain in you, rather than you hanging out with them. And maybe one time one of your friends said something triggering that caused like that instant little sting of discomfort, but then you were able to move on with your life, right? So you can see which situation would collectively accumulatively create most suffering and pain in you, right? And this is such a trap, right? So many people in recovery try endlessly avoiding discomforts. And, people eventually realize that in recovery, you can't really do that, right? You have to actually eat, for example, the food that you're scared of. You have to put yourself in that situation you're scared of, right? This also goes to life outside of recovery. So it's all about getting out of the bubble, exposing yourself to the real world. But yeah, sometimes people may say and do things that you don't like. Yeah, they're going to be maybe that one person in the office who is on the keto diet and won't shut up about it. Or that one person maybe in your class that you wonder, oh, that person is quite skinny, aren't they? But you have to work on your own resilience and your ability to handle those things without it letting it affect your actions, right? This is where resilience building comes in. And this does not mean that you should completely put yourself around the most triggering people and the most triggering things just for exposure therapy. That is not what I'm saying. You may find that there are certain people or certain spaces that are not for you, right? You may find that going to a fat-burning gym class maybe not the best environment for you, and that's fine because that is something that can be avoided. But lunch with friends, starting a new job, going to school, right? These are things that the avoidance of it is probably going to create a lot of negative things in your life, right? Avoiding a 6 a.m. fat burning class, probably not going to have any negative impact on your life, probably going to be a very good thing to avoid, right? So when you are making those decisions about what is, necessary exposure therapy for day-to-day life versus what is just unnecessary triggers, that could be something to kind of think about. Overall, a lot of what it comes back to is what are you recovering for? Aren't you recovering to be able to participate in life, to do things, including things outside your comfort zone, to grow, to prosper? That is what recovery is about. So something to be mindful of. It's kind of like getting a new haircut, but you're constantly just wearing like a scarf around it because you're so scared of harming your hair. It's like, what did you get that haircut for, right? If you can't enjoy it and look yourself in the mirror and go out and feel good about that haircut, right? So it's all about taking calculated risk. Yes, it's okay to be aware that certain spaces, certain people maybe are not for you, and you can avoid those spaces and people, right? And also could be that maybe you are at a point in your recovery where certain spaces and people right now is too triggering. And maybe there'll be a point in the future where you feel more ready to handle that. That's okay as well. Once you build some time and strength in your recovery, then you will probably realize that you're able to handle day-to-day things in a much better, more productive manner. So, another last reminder, recovery is different for everyone, right? Some people go through extreme hunger, some people don't. I mean, most people do, but there are going to be people who don't. Some people experience hypermetabolism, other people don't. I mean, yeah, people will experience that. The metabolism goes up when they're eating more. That's just basic biology. But, not everyone experiences 10,000 calories a day and can't put on weight type hypermetabolism, right? The point is, different people experience recovery differently. And you're not necessarily doing anything wrong for not having the exact same experiences as someone else. This does not justify skipping some of the 4 R's that I spoke about. And about that, I actually wrote an article about this on my Substack some time ago, which I titled, Yes, Recovery is Different for Everyone, But, and in that article, you can find it on letsrecover.substack.com. I just talk about how, yes, recovery is different from everyone, but this does not mean that you can just restrict and over-exercise your way through recovery because, recovery is different for everyone and this is my path, right? But the whole point of this episode is to encourage flexibility. Yes, you have to work on a few non-negotiable things, such as getting enough food, getting enough rest, challenging your eating disorder, reaching your set point. You can't necessarily be too flexible with these, right? But what it is more about, what our message is, embrace the uncertainty. Get out in the arena. Less thinking, more action. Yes, healthy self-analysis and self-accountability and reflection, very, very helpful. But also do this supported, right? If you have the chance to work with someone that can help support you through this, very, very helpful. And then you can set a plan and actually have something specific to work towards. But endlessly ruminating on things is probably not going to be very, very helpful, right? And if you're wondering, is something me, is something the eating disorder? I understand it can be difficult sometimes to differentiate. But there is a very simple test to figure that out, right? What would the opposite action make you feel? So for example, imagine that you are avoiding a full fat product because of, it's a preference, I like the lower fat version, right? Well, does having the full fat version scare you, right? Does it bring you fear? If it does, chances are that is an eating disorder thing that could be worth challenging. Instead of avoiding discomfort, try and investigate where there still is discomfort and put yourself in those exact situations. You're not going to mess up your recovery for feeling discomfort. If anything, that's how recovery is made. You want to feel uncomfortable. It's a sign that you're doing something right, not a sign that you're doing something wrong. So allow yourself to be human in it all. There's no such thing as a perfect recovery. And even if there was such a thing, it would just be so unhelpful because the whole point of recovery is to let go of the rigidity and the perfectionism, right? Food does not need to be perfect to be worth it, and neither does recovery. So keep going. Okay guys, this was a long episode to get started with season 2 of Recovery Talk, but I thought it was a very important topic to talk about that I know can probably resonate with some of you. Due to the length of this episode, I won't be able to take a listener question, but I do take listener questions over at Substack, and I will keep taking listener questions for the coming episodes. I got some very exciting episodes planned, which I'm looking forward to. So have an amazing week, you guys, and I'll see you next week.